I'm a 33-year-old guy, and I feel like I've been thrown into a situation I'm not sure I can handle. My family wants me to host Christmas this year, and I'll be honest, it's not looking good. Let me explain. Christmas in my family has always been a big deal. For as long as I can remember, my mom has been the host. She's the type of person who thrives in chaos, and with a family as large as ours, chaos is basically guaranteed. I have 3 siblings, all married with kids, and we're the kind of family where everyone talks over each other, the kids are always underfoot, and someone inevitably spills a drink on the carpet. But despite the craziness, it's always been magical in that messy, heartwarming way. This year, though, things are different. My mom recently had major surgery, and she's still recovering. Hosting isn't an option for her, and everyone seems to have quietly decided that I'm the next best choice. Why me? Well, I recently bought a house, a bigger one, to be exact, and I guess that automatically makes me the chosen one. Never mind that the house is barely livable right now. The walls are still bare, half the boxes are unpacked, and my oven, it's been acting up for weeks. The moment my siblings floated the idea of me hosting, I felt a sense of impending doom. My older sister, let's call her Lisa, immediately jumped in with, "It's no big deal, we'll all pitch in." She's the overly enthusiastic type who loves big family events but has a history of overpromising and underdelivering. My brother Ryan took the opposite approach. He shrugged and said, "Just order everything from catering, like that's a realistic solution when I'm already strapped for cash after renovating this place." And my younger sister, Sophie, who's usually the voice of reason, suggested we keep it simple but hasn't offered any real help. Then there's my partner, Sam. Sam has been supportive but hesitant. We've had a rough couple of months financially, between the down payment on the house and unexpected renovation costs. Hosting 20 people for Christmas doesn't exactly fit into our budget or our sanity. Sam's also worried about how this will affect my mental health. I have a demanding job, and the last thing I need is to spend all my free time preparing for a holiday that's supposed to be relaxing. As if that's not enough, we've got other logistical issues. Our dog, Rocky, isn't great around crowds. He barks at everyone and gets overly anxious when there's too much commotion. And then there's our neighbor, Mr. Crenshaw. He's the kind of guy who complains if someone parks an inch over his property line. Last month, he sent me a long, passive-aggressive text after a small dinner party we hosted, saying the extra cars were disturbing his peace. I can only imagine his reaction to a full-blown family Christmas. The thing is, I've seen what happens when a holiday gathering goes sideways. One year, when I was a kid, the turkey burned, there was a huge argument over something ridiculous, and the day ended with everyone sulking in separate rooms. I remember my mom crying in the kitchen, and I can't shake the feeling that history will repeat itself if I take this on. Except this time, I'll be the one crying in the kitchen. To make matters worse, my family doesn't just want to get together, they want Mom's Christmas. You know, the kind, perfectly decorated tree, a full spread of food, stockings for all the kids, and her signature cinnamon rolls in the morning. It's a lot to live up to, and frankly, I don't think I can. So I did what any stressed millennial would do. I turned to Reddit for advice. I posted in one of those relationship drama subreddits, laying out my situation and asking if I'd be the jerk for saying no. The responses were all over the place. Some people told me to stand my ground and refuse, while others suggested compromises, like making it potluck style or hosting a smaller, more casual gathering. Of course, there were also a few comments calling me selfish for even considering backing out. It's one day, one person wrote, "Just suck it up, easy for them to say they don't have Mr. Crenshaw next door or a broken oven." Right now, I'm stuck. My siblings are all acting like this is no big deal, but none of them are stepping up to help. Sam is trying to be supportive but clearly doesn't want this to happen. And my mom, bless her, keeps saying she doesn't want to burden me, but I can tell she's hoping I'll take this on so the family traditions can continue. I feel like I'm being pulled in a dozen different directions, and no matter what I decide, someone's going to be upset. Do I risk my sanity to keep the peace, or do I draw a line and let the chips fall where they may? Either way, it's shaping up to be a Christmas to remember, for better or worse. Update 1. After my Reddit post blew up more than I expected, I decided to take the next step and organize a family meeting. I figured the best way to get everyone on the same page was to talk it out directly, so I sent a message in our family group chat proposing a Zoom call to discuss the Christmas plans. That's when the chaos started. The group chat turned into a battlefield almost immediately. Lisa was quick to agree, claiming we could sort it out in 15 minutes, while Ryan, true to form, asked why we couldn't just skip the whole meeting and figure it out as we go. Sophie, usually the quiet one, said she couldn't make the suggested time but might be free later, which is code for I don't want to be involved. I eventually pinned everyone down to an evening slot, but not without a few passive-aggressive comments flying back and forth. When the meeting finally started, it was a mess from the get-go. Lisa took over right away, saying we should just keep it simple and that hosting wasn't that big of a deal. She suggested everyone bring a dish and call it a day, as if that somehow solves the space issue, the oven issue, and the neighbor issue all at once. Ryan jumped in to say he didn't know why we were even having a meeting, that we should just cater everything, and then casually mentioned he'd probably show up late since his in-laws wanted to do brunch that morning. Sophie, who had barely unmuted herself by this point, threw her hands up figuratively, since we were on Zoom, and said maybe we were all overthinking it. Her solution? Just have it at your house like Mom used to and see what happens. Super helpful. Then Mom joined the call, looking tired but still determined to play peacekeeper. She thanked me for organizing the meeting and said she didn't want anyone to feel pressured, but it was clear she wasn't thrilled with the idea of skipping Christmas traditions entirely. The way she looked at me through the screen felt like a mix of guilt and hope, which somehow made everything worse. Before I could respond, Lisa started talking about how important it was for the kids to have a real Christmas, and Ryan chimed in with a half-hearted agreement while scrolling through his phone. In the middle of this, Sam, who had been listening from the other room, walked into the frame and gave me a look that said, "Are you seriously letting them steamroll you?" That's when things started to unravel. Sam cut in, pointing out that we couldn't just pretend everything was fine and expect me to magically make it work. There was an awkward silence, followed by Lisa laughing nervously and saying it wasn't that serious. Ryan mumbled something about people being too dramatic, and Sophie muted herself again. I tried to suggest a compromise, a smaller, simpler gathering with fewer people and fewer dishes. Lisa rolled her eyes and called it lazy, saying it wasn't fair to the kids to miss out on the big family experience. At this point, I was ready to throw my computer out the window, but then I got a private message from my teenage niece, Emily, who's Sophie's daughter. She wrote, "Uncle Protagonist, I know it's a lot, but Christmas just isn't the same without Grandma's traditions. Please don't cancel it." That message hit me harder than I expected. Emily's one of the few people in the family who actually seems to care about how everyone else is feeling, and hearing her say that made it even harder to consider backing out. Still, the logistics were a nightmare. Our dining table seats 6 people, maybe 8 if we squish, and renting extra chairs would stretch my already tight budget. Not to mention the oven that barely works, and the neighbor who would definitely have something to say about a dozen cars clogging up the street. Speaking of Mr. Crenshaw, he somehow managed to overhear part of the Zoom meeting through the walls and sent me a text while we were still on the call. It was his usual brand of passive aggressiveness. "I hope you're not planning anything too disruptive for the holidays. Our street has been so peaceful lately." I showed the text to Sam, who just shook their head and walked out of the room. Later that night, I updated Reddit about the meeting and asked for more advice. A lot of people suggested a progressive dinner, where different family members host different parts of the meal. It seemed like a reasonable idea, so I floated it in the group chat. Lisa shot it down immediately, calling it way too complicated. Ryan didn't even bother responding. Sophie gave her usual non-committal maybe. Sam tried to reassure me, saying we'd figure it out together, but I could tell the whole situation was wearing on them. Then, just as I was about to head to bed, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Mom. She apologized for the pressure I was under and admitted she felt guilty for not being able to host this year. She even offered to help prep some dishes from her place, but I could tell she wasn't in any shape to take on much. I realized I needed to make a decision soon for everyone's sake. I gave myself a deadline. I'd figure out what to do by the end of the week. Whether the family liked it or not, I wasn't going to let this drag on forever. Update 2. After the chaotic Zoom meeting, I realized I needed to test whether hosting Christmas at my house was even remotely feasible. Sam suggested we invite a few friends over for a casual dinner, partly to test the logistics and partly to unwind after all the family drama. It sounded like a solid idea, so we set a date for the practice run. The day started off smoothly enough. I planned to make lasagna since it's relatively easy and doesn't require constant babysitting. Sam focused on tidying up the living room and setting up a few extra folding chairs we borrowed from a neighbor. Rocky, our dog, was unusually calm, which felt like a good omen. I even found myself thinking maybe this won't be so bad. That optimism lasted about an hour. The first sign of trouble was the oven. It had been acting up for weeks, but I figured it could handle one lasagna. About halfway through cooking, it started making this strange clicking noise. I opened the door to check, and the heating element had gone cold. The lasagna was half cooked, and the oven refused to turn back on. I tried resetting the circuit breaker, unplugging it, even Googling oven won't heat mid-cooking, but nothing worked. With guests arriving in less than an hour, I panicked. Sam suggested finishing the lasagna in our neighbor's oven, so I ran next door with a dish wrapped in foil. Mr. Crenshaw wasn't thrilled about the interruption, but he grudgingly agreed to let me use his oven for a few minutes. By the time I got back, the living room was already filling up with people, and Rocky had started barking. The noise was relentless. Rocky was clearly overwhelmed by the extra people and wouldn't settle down. One of our friends tried to calm him with treats, but it only made things worse. He started pacing and barking louder, which made the whole atmosphere feel tense. I ended up putting him in the bedroom, where he continued to bark intermittently, adding a lovely soundtrack to the evening. Meanwhile, the seating situation was turning into a comedy of errors. We crammed everyone into the living room, but it was obvious we didn't have enough space. One person sat on an overturned laundry basket, and another balanced their plate on a stack of books. Every time someone got up, they had to navigate around furniture like it was an obstacle course. It was uncomfortable, to say the least. When the lasagna finally came back from Mr. Crenshaw's oven, it was edible but barely warm. By then, everyone was making jokes about ordering pizza, which would have been funny if I wasn't already stressed out of my mind. As the night went on, a few friends gently pointed out that the house might not be ready for a big family gathering. They weren't wrong, but hearing it still stung. The next morning, I called a repair service to fix the oven. They quoted me a price that made my stomach drop, but I didn't have much choice. I booked the repair and added it to the growing list of Christmas expenses. Later, Lisa caught wind of the test run through the family group chat. She wasted no time mocking me for overcomplicating things. According to her, none of this would have been a problem if I just relaxed and let people fend for themselves. Easy for her to say when she's not the one hosting. Mom called that afternoon, offering to prep food at her house despite her recovery. She sounded tired, and I could tell she was pushing herself too hard, but she insisted it was no trouble. I thanked her, but didn't commit to anything. The guilt was already starting to pile up. Sam and I sat down that night to crunch the numbers, and the reality hit hard. Even a scaled-back gathering would strain our budget. Between the oven repair, renting chairs, and buying groceries, we were looking at several $100s we didn't have. Sam didn't say much during the conversation, but their silence spoke volumes. Finally, they looked me in the eye and said, "I'll support whatever you decide, but I can't do this by myself. If you take this on, you need to set boundaries." Later that night, I updated Reddit with the latest drama. The response was overwhelmingly supportive, with people reminding me to prioritize my mental health. A few users suggested hosting a potluck or splitting the event between siblings, but Lisa had already shot down those ideas. Others pointed out that my siblings were being selfish and encouraged me to stand my ground. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, Sophie unexpectedly offered to host Christmas at her place. For about 5 seconds, I felt relieved, until I remembered her house is even smaller than mine. Lisa immediately dismissed the idea, accusing Sophie of not taking Christmas seriously, which led to yet another round of group chat drama. By the end of the day, Lisa was back to accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful, while Sophie went radio silent. Meanwhile, Sam became noticeably distant. They weren't angry, just drained, and I couldn't blame them. The unresolved tension was taking a toll on both of us. I realized I couldn't keep juggling everyone's expectations without breaking down. I needed to clear the air, starting with Mom. If anyone could help me figure this out, it was her. I decided to visit her in person, hoping a one-on-one conversation might help resolve the guilt and pressure. It felt like my last chance to salvage this situation before Christmas turned into a complete disaster. Update 3. I decided it was time to talk to Mom face to face. It wasn't an easy decision, she's still recovering from surgery, and I didn't want to stress her out, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we needed to clear the air. I stopped by the store on the way and picked up her favorite tea, hoping it might help set a more relaxed tone. When I arrived, she looked tired but happy to see me. Her living room was quieter than I'd ever seen it. Usually it's filled with family, laughter, and the occasional argument, but now it was just her, a stack of magazines, and the soft hum of the TV. I made the tea and sat down, trying to figure out the best way to start. It didn't take long for the conversation to turn to Christmas. She admitted she felt guilty about not being able to host this year. She was worried that without her, the traditions she'd spent decades building would fall apart. She told me she'd overheard some of the family drama during the Zoom meeting, including Lisa's sarcastic comments about me overcomplicating things. Mom said she'd wanted to step in but felt too drained to deal with it at the time. We ended up talking about Lisa's history of taking over family events and being overly critical when things didn't go her way. Mom confessed it wasn't the first time she'd felt torn between stepping in and staying out of it. She shared stories of past Christmases where Lisa's nitpicking had left her feeling exhausted by the end of the day. Hearing all this made me realize how much Mom had been carrying all these years, even though she'd always made it look effortless. I apologized for the resentment I'd been holding on to, especially since some of it was misplaced. Mom apologized, too, for unintentionally putting me in a position where I felt like I had to take over. It was a heavy conversation, but by the end of it, we both felt lighter. We started brainstorming a compromise that could work for everyone. The idea we landed on was a simplified Christmas lunch instead of the usual all-day event. Fewer dishes, fewer hours, and a lot less stress. Mom even offered to help by preparing some of her signature dishes in advance and having them delivered to my house. It was her way of staying involved without pushing herself too hard. We sketched out a budget-friendly menu together, roast chicken instead of turkey, a couple of easy sides, and a store-bought dessert. This way, I wouldn't have to rely on the oven too much, which was still on shaky ground even after the repair. Mom also suggested I have a private talk with Lisa to set some boundaries. She believed Lisa might not even realize how her behavior was affecting everyone. When I got home, I shared the plan with Sam. They looked visibly relieved. While they were still cautious about how everything would play out, the idea of a shorter, simpler event seemed much more manageable. We also finalized arrangements for Rocky. A friend of ours who loves dogs offered to take him for the day, which meant no barking and no added stress. The next step was smoothing things over with Mr. Crenshaw. I baked a batch of cookies and wrote an apology note for any potential holiday disruptions. When I dropped them off, he actually seemed touched. He mentioned how stressful the holidays could be and said he appreciated the gesture. I wasn't sure if it would completely prevent future complaints, but it felt like a step in the right direction. With the plan mostly in place, I shared it in the family group chat. Lisa was unimpressed, of course. She made a vague comment about how cutting corners wasn't in the spirit of Christmas. Sophie, on the other hand, said it sounded like a great compromise. Ryan responded with a thumbs-up emoji, which was about as much enthusiasm as I'd expected from him. Mom chimed in, supporting the plan and emphasizing how important it was for everyone to come together, even if things weren't as elaborate as usual. That seemed to quiet most of the complaints, though Lisa's silence after that was deafening. I decided to let it go for now. There was no pleasing everyone, and I wasn't going to let one person derail the entire day. Later that night, I updated Reddit with the new plan. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People praised me for finding a middle ground and setting boundaries with my family. A few users shared similar stories about family drama during the holidays, which made me feel less alone in the whole ordeal. One comment even joked that I deserved a medal for dealing with Lisa. By the end of the week, I had RSVPs from most of the family. Even Lisa confirmed she'd come, though her message was notably lacking in enthusiasm. Still, it felt like progress. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we might actually pull this off. Update 4. The day before Christmas, Sam and I dove headfirst into preparations. The plan was simple: spend the day cleaning, decorating, and prepping the few dishes we were responsible for. Mom's food delivery was scheduled to arrive in the evening, which gave us plenty of time to get everything in place. At least, that was the plan. By mid-morning, the house was buzzing with activity. Sam focused on decorations, stringing up fairy lights and setting up a small but charming centerpiece on the dining table. I tackled the kitchen, chopping vegetables and assembling ingredients for a salad and a simple baked pasta dish. The calm didn't last long. Sophie texted me around noon with a last-minute request. She wanted to bring her new boyfriend, a guy none of us had met yet. She framed it as a small favor, but it was clear she'd already made up her mind. I glanced at the seating arrangements we'd carefully planned and sighed. Adding another person meant shuffling things around, but it wasn't worth arguing over. Not long after, Lisa dropped her bombshell. She messaged me to say she was bringing a few extra dishes to the gathering. Her tone was unmistakable. This wasn't a kind gesture, it was a power play. I reminded her about the simplified menu, but she brushed it off, insisting her dishes were traditional and necessary. I could already picture her waltzing in with her signature over the top casseroles and side dishes, completely overshadowing the modest meal we had planned. By the time the food delivery from Mom arrived, I was already on edge. When I opened the boxes, I realized one of the key dishes, her famous mashed potatoes, was missing. A quick call to the delivery service confirmed there'd been a mix-up, and the missing dish was still sitting at the restaurant. They couldn't promise it would arrive in time. That's when panic set in. I grabbed my keys and drove to the nearest grocery store, hoping to pick up some ready-made mashed potatoes or at least the ingredients to make them myself. The store was a madhouse. Shelves were half empty, lines stretched down the aisles, and the holiday music blaring over the speakers did nothing to soothe my nerves. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to grab a bag of potatoes and a few other last-minute items before heading home. While I was out, Sam stepped up. They finalized the decorations, rearranged the seating to accommodate Sophie's boyfriend, and even had time to vacuum the living room. When I walked through the door, they handed me a cup of tea and told me everything was under control. For the first time that day, I felt a small wave of relief. That relief didn't last long. Around 4 p.m., Mr. Crenshaw texted me again. This time, he complained about the cars parked on the street, claiming they were already an eyesore and warning me to keep things under control tomorrow. I ignored the message and focused on peeling potatoes. Unexpectedly, Sophie showed up early with her kids. Instead of adding to the chaos, she actually pitched in. She helped peel and mash the potatoes, kept her kids entertained, and even folded a stack of napkins into fancy shapes for the table. It was a small gesture, but it made a huge difference. Meanwhile, Rocky was having a much better day. Our friend texted to say he'd settled in nicely at their place and was napping on their couch. Knowing he was in good hands eased a big chunk of my stress. By the time guests started arriving, the house looked festive, and the food was coming together. Of course, Lisa arrived late, carrying multiple dishes and making a grand entrance. She immediately zeroed in on the simplified decorations and made a loud comment about how different everything looked this year. It was the kind of remark that was technically neutral but designed to make everyone uncomfortable. Before I could respond, Mom spoke up. She calmly but firmly thanked me for hosting and reminded Lisa that this year wasn't about the decorations or the food, it was about being together as a family. The room went quiet, and for once, Lisa didn't have a snappy comeback. It was a rare and satisfying moment. The rest of the evening wasn't without its hiccups. Sophie's boyfriend got into a heated political argument with Ryan, which made things awkward for a while, but eventually everyone moved on and the mood lightened. The food turned out better than expected. Even Lisa grudgingly complimented the baked pasta, and Mom's roast chicken was a hit. By the end of the night, people were laughing and sharing stories like old times. Sam pulled me aside at one point and whispered that I was doing a great job, which was all the encouragement I needed to make it through the final stretch. After the last guest left, Sam and I tackled the cleanup together. We stacked plates, gathered stray glasses, and wiped down every surface that had seen a crumb of food. When it was finally done, we collapsed onto the couch. The house was quiet again, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. Sam leaned their head on my shoulder, and we both sat there, too tired to talk but grateful it was over. Update 5. The morning after Christmas, I woke up to a flood of messages. Some were nice, texts from family members thanking me for hosting, complimenting the food, or sharing pictures from the night before. Others, not so much. Lisa predictably had taken her grievances to Facebook. Her status read something like, "Missing the good old days when Christmas felt special. Wish we could go back to how Mom used to do it." Subtle. I debated whether to respond or let it go. Ultimately, I decided not to take the bait. Lisa's always been this way, and engaging would only escalate things. Still, the passive aggressiveness was hard to ignore. Surprisingly, Sophie reached out with a more sincere message. She apologized for the drama her boyfriend had caused during dinner and thanked me for all the effort I'd put into hosting. She mentioned how much her kids had enjoyed the day and said she knew it wasn't easy juggling everyone's expectations. Coming from Sophie, it meant a lot. Sam and I spent most of the morning cleaning up the last of the mess. We tackled the stubborn gravy stains on the tablecloth, vacuumed up crumbs from every corner, and returned the folding chairs to the neighbor who'd loaned them. By noon, the house finally felt normal again. Sam hugged me and told me I'd handled everything like a pro. They even joked about helping me train for next year, though we both agreed we'd think long and hard before taking this on again. Around lunchtime, there was an unexpected knock at the door. It was Mr. Crenshaw. For a second, I braced myself for more complaints, but instead, he handed me a bottle of wine. He admitted he'd been overly sensitive about the parking situation and said he appreciated how I'd tried to keep things under control. It was probably the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from him, and honestly, I'll take it. Later that afternoon, Mom called. She sounded more relaxed than she had in weeks. She thanked me for stepping up and said how proud she was of how I'd handled everything. I know it wasn't perfect, she added, but nothing ever is. What matters is that we were all together. Hearing that felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. She also mentioned how she'd noticed Lisa's behavior and told me not to take it personally. Apparently, Lisa had always been a bit difficult, even as a kid. That evening, Sophie called with an idea. She suggested we start rotating hosting duties among the siblings, so no one person bears the entire burden every year. I could practically hear the relief in her voice as she floated the idea. She promised to bring it up with Lisa and Ryan, though we both knew Lisa wouldn't take it well. By the time the day wound down, it hit me that Lisa hadn't spoken to me directly since Christmas night. Not a call, not a text, nothing. It wasn't unusual for her to hold a grudge, but I couldn't help but feel annoyed that she'd rather sulk than acknowledge anyone else's effort. Still, I wasn't about to let her ruin what had otherwise been a successful holiday. That night, I updated Reddit with the full story, from the initial chaos to the compromises and all the unexpected twists in between. The post blew up even faster than my first one. Comments poured in, with people sharing their own family holiday horror stories and praising me for navigating such a messy situation. One user joked that the whole ordeal sounded like a plot for a Hallmark Christmas movie, complete with an overbearing sibling, last-minute surprises, and a feel-good ending. It made me laugh more than I expected. Scrolling through the comments, I realized just how many people could relate to the stress of hosting family gatherings. One recurring theme stood out: the importance of setting boundaries. A few months ago, I might have bent over backward trying to make everyone happy, but this experience taught me that it's okay to say no, or at least compromise. In the days that followed, the family dynamic started to shift. Mom and Sophie began advocating for more equitable holiday planning, pushing back on Lisa's tendency to take over and Ryan's habit of coasting through without contributing. It wasn't a perfect system, but it felt like progress. As for me and Sam, we decided to keep New Year's simple. Instead of hosting another big gathering, we invited a few close friends over for a quiet night in. No fancy decorations, no complicated meal plans, just snacks, board games, and a bottle of champagne. It felt like the perfect way to close out the year. Looking back, I'm glad I took on the challenge of hosting Christmas. It wasn't easy, and it definitely wasn't perfect, but it taught me a lot about myself and my family. For one, I'm stronger than I thought. And two, it's okay to let go of traditions that no longer work and create new ones that do. While I don't know what next Christmas will look like, one thing's for sure, I'm no longer afraid to set boundaries or stand my ground. And honestly, that might be the best gift I've ever given myself.